All right, what's up, guys? Today I'm back with another tier list. Today I'm going to be ranking the UFC rivalries that we've seen throughout the years. Not every single one of them, but a lot of them, a lot of my favorite ones. I'm going to be ranking them by how exciting the fights were, how good was the trash talk, the skill level of the fights, the build-ups, all that good stuff. So let's get right into it. Starting off with Sean O'Malley versus Marlon Vera. I'm putting this in the C tier. Not the best rivalry. It was okay. Cheeto had the win in 2020 over Sean O'Malley after he kicked his perennial nerve, and then Sean O'Malley went down and Cheeto got on top of him and pounded him out. Actually put him out for a second if you've seen that fight. And then in the rematch, Sean O'Malley schooled Cheeto for 5 rounds and hit him with one of the biggest knees I've ever seen. Sounded like a baseball bat, cracked his chin. But the reason I can't put this higher, neither of these guys are good at trash talking. Sean O'Malley, not a good talker, as we know. He's a good fighter, but not a good talker. And then Cheeto fights like an idiot. I can't explain it. If you know, you know. Cheeto, he has one of the greatest chins in UFC history, but he fights reserved, like he's scared of everybody. But nonetheless, they had a solid 2 fights, entertaining to watch. It spawned the Sean O'Malley undefeated meme because he said he never lost to Cheeto. Let's move on to another fight on this tier list, rivalry. We're going to go Dominic Cruz versus Uriah Faber in the A tier. Listen, this is one of my favorite rivalries. They fought 3 times, and I can tell you the UFC 199 press conference with these two going back and forth for like 5 minutes straight was one of the most legendary, hilarious moments at press conferences. Dominic Cruz absolutely grilled Uriah Faber at UFC 199, the press conference. If you haven't seen that, go watch it. That was Dominic Cruz's trash talking in his prime. Faber actually submitted Dominic Cruz in the WEC, and then early UFC career, Dominic Cruz beat Faber by decision in Dominic Cruz fashion. And then in their third fight at UFC 199, Cruz goes on to win another decision. But one of the best rivalries, just all around funny trash talk, funny moments. So I got to put it in the A tier because I was super entertained by them. Let's move on to another rivalry. We're going with the old heads. Tito Ortiz and Chuck Liddell. This is the rivalry that put me on the UFC. In 2004, I can remember watching this fight for the first time when they first fought, and it was so highly anticipated. The Huntington Beach Bad Boy versus the Iceman, and Chuck Liddell obviously got the knockout in the first and second fight because they fought again in 2006. I don't really rate the last fight they had in 2018 because Chuck Liddell was 48 at that point, and he was literally an old man walking in the cage with a cane. So Tito shouldn't feel proud of that win. So Chuck Liddell definitely got the better of this rivalry. It was entertaining. It was solid trash talk. And yeah, put me onto the UFC, so I got to put some respect on it. So yeah, let's move on to another rivalry on this list. I'm going to go Pereira and Adesanya. Listen, just for the storyline of this, I got to put an S tier. You have Adesanya, who fought Pereira in kickboxing 2 times. First time he lost a close decision, and then he got brutally KO'd by Pereira in kickboxing. Then he makes his MMA debut. He climbs all the way to the UFC championship, beating Robert Whittaker. And after he beat Robert Whittaker and became the champion, a few years later, you see Pereira creeping into MMA. He gets a couple wins, and then he fights Sean Strickland, knocks Sean Strickland out, and then he comes up all the way from kickboxing to the UFC, follows Adesanya, and takes his belt. And then in the rematch, Adesanya comes back and brutally KOs him, finally gets one up on him, showboats in front of his kid, does the 3-arrow celebration. It was one of the most surreal moments in UFC history, seeing Adesanya finally get one up on Pereira. And then after this, of course, Pereira moves up to the light heavyweight division and starts destroying everyone. I don't think they'll ever fight again, but real wins know Pereira got the better of the rivalry. He has 2 wins in kickboxing and 1 in MMA. Adesanya only having 1 win. And yeah, so just for the storyline factor, gotta put this in S tier. I don't think many people would disagree with that. Let's move on to another rivalry. Covington versus Usman. I'm putting this in A tier. Listen, this was a great rivalry. Just the press conferences alone was amazingly entertaining. The fights were really good. The first fight, there was a lot of controversy with Usman faking nut shots and back of the head shots in the 5th round for the finish. But listen, they went back and forth. Colby Covington, Kamaru Usman. It was 2-2 going into the 5th, and then Usman gets the finish. The first fight was extremely entertaining. The press conferences, the roast. And then in the second fight, more or less the same thing, back and forth. Colby knocks Usman down. Usman knocks Colby down, I think, at one point. Great rivalry. Colby Covington probably said some crazy stuff, obviously, because he's Colby Covington. But it was a good rivalry, good fights. If you haven't seen the press conferences to these fights between Colby and Usman, go watch them. Definitely worth a watch. And I was super entertained, so I got to put it A tier. Let's move on to another rivalry in the UFC. We got Woodley and Stephen Thompson. This was friendly for the most part, so I'm going to put it in C tier just because Woodley talked a bit of smack, and then you remember Stephen Thompson said, man, why you got to be so mean? And yeah, they had 2 fights. The first fight was a majority draw at UFC 205, and then the second fight at UFC 209 ended up being a close decision win for Tyron Woodley. He knocked down Stephen Thompson a couple times. I will say their fights were pretty boring. They had exciting moments, but man, these fights were snoozers. Tyron Woodley was known for having snoozer championship fights. But nonetheless, I enjoyed the build-ups. I enjoyed the fights. Stephen Thompson, man, so close to winning that belt, but he came just short of it. Respect. It was a good 2 fights between them. Let's move on to the next fight on this list. Tony and Khabib. I'm putting a C tier just for the simple fact that they never fought, but man, did they have a competitive rivalry. At that time they were supposed to fight, I think they were both 10-0. And yeah, it was the longest 2 win streaks in lightweight history versus each other. Super exciting. This fight was scheduled a record 5 times and never happened. You had Tony pull out because he had lung issues, and you had Khabib pull out because he had injuries. And then Tony snaps his knee over a cord, and they gets pulled out again. And then the fight gets canceled again due to COVID. Like, this fight literally got canceled so many times, and it was so frustrating because we just wanted to see prime Tony versus prime Khabib, the 2 longest win streaks in lightweight history, going up against each other. It never happened. One of the biggest what-ifs in UFC history, but they did have some funny moments at press conferences and funny things that happened. It's Tony time. It's Khabib time. Tell him, Dana. But yeah, it's one of the biggest what-ifs, as I said. Let's move on. Another one for the old heads. We got to go with Chael Sonnen and Anderson Silva. Anderson Silva, you absolutely suck. This time we're up in the stakes. Yeah, that rivalry, dude. Chael Sonnen was so close to being the middleweight champion. He dominated Anderson Silva for 4.5 rounds, and then he got tapped out by a triangle in the 5th round. That's crazy to me. Like, if Chael Sonnen would have just hung on and not got triangled, he would have dominated Anderson Silva and became the middleweight champion. Can you imagine the undefeated Chael Sonnen? No. They fought 2 times. The trash talk was legendary from Chael Sonnen. In the rematch, Chael Sonnen got smoked after throwing like a ill-advised spinning back fist. He got TKO'd against the fence. So, yeah, man, Chael Sonnen, he almost became champ, but he just came up short. What can I say? Great rivalry, great 2 fights. Let's move on to another one on this list. Conor McGregor and Nate Diaz. I'm going S tier. Listen, if you've seen the UFC 196 press conferences, this was one of the funniest press conferences. He coaches kids jiu-jitsu on a Sunday morning and goes on bike rides with the elderly. I don't give a fuck. You're on steroids. Sure I am. I'm just an animal. Yeah, dude, that press conference, the build-up, Nate took that fight on 10 days' notice. And then he goes in there and shocks the world and submits Conor McGregor in the 2nd round. After Conor McGregor was like, his aura was like at an all-time peak high here. And Nate Diaz gets on the mic. I'm not surprised, motherfuckers. That was so legendary. And then, of course, they had the rematch at UFC 202 where Conor McGregor won a majority decision. Arguably lost in a lot of people's eyes. But the trash talk, get the fuck out of here. You'll do fucking nothing. Oh, my goodness. Sorry for that, guys. But yeah, the press conferences between these two were legendary. This was like peak UFC for me. Like 2016 McGregor Diaz trash talk, just peak entertainment. Gotta put it in the S tier. Anywhere else is cruel. Let's move on to another rivalry on this list. Moreno versus Figgy. Listen, I'm putting this in the C tier because, like I said, neither of them really speak English all that well. Brandon Moreno does, but they fought 4 times in a row, which is quite insane. A quadrilogy in the UFC. If I remember correctly, Brandon Moreno beat Figueiredo the first time, took the belt, and then Figueiredo came back. Or no. They had a draw in the first fight, actually, I believe. And then in the rematch, Brandon Moreno submitted Davis and Figueiredo. And then in the third fight, Davis and Figueiredo won the belt back. And in the 4th fight, Brandon Moreno won it back again. And then Figueiredo moved up to bantamweight. This was, honestly, I think people got burnt out of seeing these 2 fight just because it was like, dude, the flyweight division needs to move on. It already lacks excitement. We're just watching the same 2 guys fight over and over. Nonetheless, it was nice to see them scrap 4 times, and both of them got wins in the trilogy or quadrilogy, so it was good to see. Brandon Moreno ended up winning coming up on top at the end. So, yeah, we'll put that in the C tier just because, like I said, not too much animosity between them. Let's move on. Colby Covington versus Jorge Masvidal. Bitter best friend turns bitter rivals. They had a fight headlined the pay-per-view, I think, at UFC 245. I don't remember. It was a couple years ago, 2022, I think, 2021. They fought. They were bitter, best friend terms, bitter rivals. Jorge Masvidal had an issue with Covington not paying his coach at one point, and a lot of people thought the trash talk between them was fake, and it was played up for the pay-per-views. But that was all put to bed after Colby Covington beat Jorge Masvidal by dominant decision in a fight, and then Jorge Masvidal found Colby Covington at a restaurant in Miami, sucker punched him, got arrested for it. Very embarrassing by Masvidal. You had 25 minutes to do it in the cage. You couldn't. So you sucker punch Colby. You're almost nearly 40-year-old man with kids, and you're sucker punching. This is where I really started to not like Masvidal, just because like the whole street thing was played out. But nonetheless, the rivalry was entertaining. The press conferences over the top entertaining. So got to put a B tier. And yeah, let's move on to another rivalry on this list. Max Holloway and Volkanovski. I'm putting it in the C tier, just because for the most part it remained respectful. They fought 3 times. Volkanovski, of course, shocking the world, securing that win at UFC 249 against Max. It was a good fight, but he outpointed and outworked Max over 5 rounds and took the belt from him. And then in the rematch, Max came back, made some adjustments, knocked Volk down twice, one with a head kick, and people were like, oh, Max is coming back. And then nope, Volk comes back and wins the last 3 rounds, retains his belt, and then, of course, in the third fight, Volk cuts Max in the first round over his eye, and then he just puts a boxing clinic on Max. He dominated Max in that third fight, cementing himself, in my opinion, as the greatest featherweight of all time, because Volk has wins over Max, he has wins over Jose Aldo, and yeah, he just has a bunch of all-time wins. So this rivalry was great. I'm not going to lie, I wanted Max to beat Volkanovski. I wanted to see Max go on another long run, one of my favorite fighters. We'll see what he can do against Topuria this weekend. But yeah, Volk versus Max in the C tier for sure. Let's move on to the next one on this list. Let's go Conor McGregor Khabib. Listen, I got to put this in the S tier. This rivalry spawned the biggest fight in UFC history, UFC 229, the most pay-per-view buys. Like, just the build-up to this fight was insane. Conor McGregor, drunken Conor McGregor at the press conference. It was a really dark press conference. Like, some of the stuff Conor McGregor was throwing out there. Like, it was, if you haven't seen it, go watch it, the UFC 229 press conference. It was kind of sad because you saw Conor McGregor drinking whiskey, and all I can think about is how Khabib literally grew up in the mountains. He's a Muslim. He's dedicated to the sport. There's no way McGregor's going to beat him. And yeah, McGregor gave Khabib a pretty decent fight. You know, he won 1 round. I think he won the 3rd round, and then Khabib submitted him in the 4th. But man, whenever they both were in the octagon and Bruce Buffer was announcing them, that was like, I was literally like shivering and like nervousness. So like, oh my goodness, what's going to happen? Like, that was one of the craziest, like most aura fights I've ever seen. So yeah, I got to put it S tier just because it was the biggest fight in UFC history. The build up with Conor McGregor throwing a dolly at a bus while Khabib was in it. Like, just everything about this fight was crazy. And yeah, they still hate each other till this day. They do not like each other. So a real rivalry. They really hated each other. Let's move on to another one on this list. Aldo versus McGregor. Listen, a lot of people will put this S tier. For me, I'm going to put it A tier just for the simple fact that they only fought 1 time and the fight ended in 13 seconds. But man, the lead up to this fight, the press conferences of McGregor going to Brazil and taking Jose Aldo's belt in Dublin, and just they went on a world tour, and then Aldo pulls out with a rib injury. Mendez steps in. McGregor TKOs Mendez for the interim strap, and then they go on to fight at UFC 194. And man, I remember watching this fight. The last thing I ever thought would happen would be McGregor KOing Aldo in 13 seconds. It wasn't. I thought McGregor was going to win. I don't know why I just did. But nobody saw him knocking him out in 13 seconds. But at that point, man, Aldo was the #1 pound-for-pound fighter in the world. He was 25-1. He hadn't been beaten in nearly 10 years. And yeah, McGregor went in there and KO'd him. And I really wanted to see a rematch just because I wanted to see how Aldo would fare if he didn't get KO'd right away. But they never rematched. And that's the reason to have this in A tier. I'm not going to put it in S just because they only fought once, even though the build-up was legendary. And it's nice to see Conor shows respect to Aldo these days. Conor's nice to Aldo, so that's nice to see. Yeah, let's move on to another rivalry in the A tier. I'm going to put Garbrandt versus TJ in the A tier. just because the whole like alpha male versus TJ Dillashaw versus Team Alpha Male thing was a funny buildup, and Dominic Cruz versus Alpha Male was a funny buildup too. But man, after Cody Garbrandt beat Dominic Cruz, everybody thought he was going to school TJ Dillashaw, TJ Chinny Dillashaw, and then Cody comes out and says he has a clip of him knocking down TJ in sparring, drops the clip. And even in the fight, man, Cody Garbrandt in the first fight comes out, he knocks down TJ at the end of the first round, and everybody's thinking like, man, he's going to KO TJ. And what do you know? TJ comes back to head kick him and finish him in the second round. And then in the second fight, he finishes him even faster. And man, Cody Garbrandt was never the same fighter after this. So yeah, TJ won. Who knows if he was clean? He was probably on the roids just because he tested positive for EPO like a year or two later against Cejudo. But got to put this in the A tier just because the press conferences, the trash talk, the animosity, and everything, it was super entertaining to me. So I'm going to put that in the A tier. Let's move on to another rivalry on this list. Petr Yan versus Aljamain Sterling. I'm putting in the C tier. I would put it higher, but it was really cringe. And man, imagine what could have been if Petr Yan didn't throw that knee. If he didn't throw that knee and disqualify himself, and then he lost in the rematch against Aljamain, a close decision because he let Aljamain get on his back for 2 rounds and secure those rounds. But man, Petr Yan's coaches fell on him and tell him to throw that knee to the head on a downed opponent was so disappointing. Yeah, Aljamain Sterling after that fight became the most hated fighter in the UFC at the time just because everybody knew he faked how much. I'm not doubting the knee hurt him, but he definitely played it up to get a disqualification win. And yeah, he was a paper champ, but he did win in the rematch. And then after that, he went on to beat Henry Cejudo, who was coming back after retirement, and he beat TJ Dillashaw with one arm. So yeah, we know Aljamain Sterling had a very fluky title run, but nonetheless, he had a solid rivalry with Petr Yan. And yeah, now he fights at featherweight, so they probably will never fight again. Let's move on to the second to last one on this list. Rockhold versus Bisping. I'm putting this in the A tier. Man, this, if you've seen the UFC 199 press conference, Michael Bisping absolutely verbally destroys Luke Rockhold. Conceive, believe, achieve. Shut the fuck up. And then Luke Rockhold, I'm a samurai. Oh, man, he grilled. And the funny part is they had 2 fights. Luke Rockhold head kicked Bisping in their first fight and then into a guillotine and finished him. And then Rockhold was set to fight Chris Weidman in a rematch at UFC 199. But Chris Weidman pulls out injured and Bisping steps in off a movie set on 2 weeks' notice. Nothing to lose. Everybody's writing him off, including Luke Rockhold. Luke Rockhold was obviously underestimating him. Bisping's like admitting that he got him in the first fight. He's going to come back better in the second fight. And man, on 2 weeks' notice, he KOs Luke Rockhold in the first round. Insanity. Bisping fulfills his dream of becoming the champion. The post-fight press conference with all the fighters was legendary with Bisping drinking a beer, roasting Luke Rockhold for losing, getting KO'd. I was hoping we would see a trilogy between these two, but it never came to fruition. But nonetheless, one of the most entertaining press conferences leading up to their second fight. And yeah, I was super entertained, so I got to put this in the A tier. And my personal favorite rivalry of all time, I saved it for last. I'm putting this in the S tier. DC versus Jon Jones. Listen, if you know, you know. Jon Jones is obviously a scumbag, but man, I got to admit, UFC 192, their first fight, the lead up, whenever you hear Jon Jones saying there's nothing you can do to stop me, coming at you round after round, you will lose this fight, Daniel Cormier. Every ounce of training you put into this fight will be a waste of your life. That line was so cold. And then Jon Jones, with all of the controversies, this rivalry was insane. But I'll go through it. Jon Jones fought DC at UFC 192. He beat him by a 5-round decision. He took down DC multiple times, as he said he would. It actually comes out he tested positive for cocaine a few days before the fight, so that was a huge controversy. He at some point hits a pregnant woman, gets stripped of the title, comes back. DC wins the title in his absence. Jon Jones comes back, fights OSP, and then he's supposed to fight Cormier for UFC 200, tests positive for steroids, I believe. And DC ends up fighting Anderson Silva at UFC 200. Finally, at UFC 217, the rematch happens. Jon Jones looking jacked out of his mind, obviously because he's on steroids. And the lead up to the second fight, I beat you after a weekend of cocaine and prostitutes. It was so entertaining, dude. The DC Jon Jones build up in both fights was legendary. I will say Jon Jones really ruined DC's life with the PEDs and like Jon Jones, did he really need to take PEDs to beat Daniel Cormier? He had a 12-inch reach advantage. He was taller. He was longer. He had every advantage in the book against DC. It wasn't enough. Bro still had to take steroids. Obviously, he finished DC in the second fight by a third-round TKO. Head kicked him. DC was actually looking good in that second fight. He was looking sharp, but he got hit by a head kick and then finished on the ground. Jon Jones comes with his lame emotional speech, and then he tests positive for steroids after that fight. DC gets the belt again, reinstated as champion, and that fight is labeled a no contest, and they never fought again. But legendary build-ups in both fights. The trash talk was unmatched. The aura around this fight was unmatched, so I got to put an S tier. By far, my favorite rivalry of all time. Yeah, let me know what you guys think in the comments. I didn't include every single rivalry ever in this video. You could have included more, like Chael Sonnen and Vanderlei Silva, Miesha Tate, Ronda Rousey, Juliana Pena, Amanda Nunes, but I didn't include those in this video. Let me know what you guys think in the comments of my rankings. What would you include? Thank you guys for all the new subscribers. If you enjoy the content, please like and subscribe to videos. I always appreciate it. And yeah, I'm out. Peace.